Hey, girl. Down on your luck. You get a podcast, you can still terrorize people.
An ordinary evening at The Daily Show took an unexpected turn when Jon Stewart, with his signature wry smile, settled back into his familiar anchor spot and casually glanced at the camera. What he said next was so perfectly aimed that it immediately sparked a huge debate. Meghan Markle, he stated, letting the words hang for a moment, is basically a miniature Brigitte Macron, quite good at keeping her man in line. The studio audience erupted in cheers and laughter. Just like that, the entire conversation around Meghan Markle shifted dramatically. A palpable change was in the air. For those who don't know, Brigitte Macron is France's First Lady. She's notably older than her husband, President Emmanuel Macron, and European media often show her as being very much in control or publicly assertive. There's even a widely shared video where she subtly moves her husband's hand away during a diplomatic event, a quick moment that, surprisingly, grabbed headlines across the continent. This is exactly the comparison Jon Stewart made, and he didn't just throw it out there as a casual comment. He built a whole segment around it, creating a sharply funny piece that systematically highlighted what many saw as weaknesses in Meghan's carefully crafted public image. This wasn't some random, quickly forgotten celebrity gossip. This was Jon Stewart. He's widely known as one of the sharpest, most incisive comedic voices in American television history. He's not one for trivial chatter or spreading internet rumors. His reputation is built on dissecting political absurdities, challenging power structures, and adding intellectual depth to satire. So, when he chose to focus on Meghan Markle, his critique carried a weight that criticisms from other sources simply didn't. He wasn't just making fun of a public figure. He was, in his unique way, delivering a significant commentary. And his message was received loud and clear by a massive audience. The public reaction was instant. Social media platforms, including what used to be Twitter, were flooded with responses. Memes popped up within minutes. Images putting Meghan and Brigitte side by side with captions like "boss babes" or just "bossy" spread everywhere. Others showed Prince Harry, digitally inserted into that famous Macron footage, awkwardly trying to hold Meghan's hand as she brushed him off, almost like a security guard. The shift was unmistakable. For years, Meghan had managed a delicate balance, navigating between being a perceived victim and declaring her empowerment, straddling the line between royalty and rebel. Stewart's comment, with one decisive stroke, shattered that meticulously, built equilibrium. Later reports suggested that Meghan Markle was absolutely furious. Behind the scenes, the Sussex team was in a frantic scramble to deal with the situation. She reportedly felt the segment was not only mean-spirited, but also sexist, outdated, and deeply unfair. She felt singled out, perhaps even profoundly misunderstood. However, here's the crucial difference. Most of the public didn't see it that way. They saw it as a skillfully executed, acutely observed piece of satire. They saw a comedian finally saying what many had quietly thought for some time, that maybe, just maybe, Meghan's big empowerment narrative seemed off. Furthermore, her podcast, Archetypes, humorously rephrased as Confessions of a Female, Founder in the Source video, certainly didn't help her standing. This project was meant to show Meghan's intelligence, her insights, and her unique perspective. Instead, for many critics, it became a prime example of what they called her brand's decline. The show was widely seen as superficial, lacking real depth. Its format involved gentle questions, vague affirmations, and a repeating, "thank you for asking," that rarely led to any real answers. Stewart, with his sharp wit, tore it apart. He quipped that it was less about female founders and more about a foundering female. The studio audience roared with laughter. You could almost picture it. Somewhere in Montecito, a public relations assistant probably quit on the spot. The critical element here wasn't just the joke itself, but when it happened. Meghan's public image had been slowly eroding for months. Unfulfilled multi-million-dollar deals, awkward interviews, and an odd, pervasive sense that her initiatives just weren't connecting like they used to. She was once praised as the refreshing outsider, the progressive voice challenging the old monarchy. But now, that story was clearly faltering. And Stewart didn't just highlight this struggle. He put it on a huge stage, illuminating it for everyone to see. What amplified the impact of this particular comedic jab was who delivered it. Jon Stewart is not Megyn Kelly or Piers Morgan. He's not part of the conservative media machine that has, for years, criticized the Sussexes. He stands as a liberal icon, admired by the very demographic Meghan's team had so diligently tried to win over. Feminists, progressives, creatives, people in the entertainment industry. These were, in many ways, her core supporters. And now, they were joining in the laughter. The humor aimed at Meghan, slapping her husband into place, was more than just a clever line. It was a resonant cultural statement. It conveyed ideas of control, emasculation, and dominance. Whether that portrayal is absolutely accurate or not, the sheer volume of its resonance speaks volumes about how the public is increasingly viewing the Sussexes. Prince Harry, once the rebellious royal, the spare, carving his own path, is now often depicted as the one lagging behind his wife at high-profile events, seemingly carrying her purse, passively agreeing with her statements. Somewhere along the way, the general perception inverted. What was once seen as a noble act of defiance now, for many, feels like carefully staged chaos. In a media world obsessed with authenticity, or at least its convincing imitation, Meghan's meticulously crafted public image is starting to look less inspiring and, frankly, more exhausting. This is what made Stewart's joke so powerful. It wasn't wild or conspiratorial. It wasn't even overtly mean-spirited, like a sensationalized tabloid headline. It was simply keenly observed. And in the world of satire, that's far more devastating. It implied he was tapping into a truth that people already sensed, perhaps unconsciously, that Meghan Markle's public brand, this portrayal of strength, leadership, and compassion, might just be overly constructed. And in America, when satire hits so precisely, it often marks a turning point, not just in media, but in the broader culture. It signals the shift of a public figure from being iconic to becoming ironic. One moment, you embody the voice of change. The next, you become the punchline. Meghan's public relations team will undoubtedly try to spin this situation. There might be a new public appearance, a carefully worded statement, perhaps even a new charity effort to champion. However, many believe the damage is done. People are no longer just scrutinizing her. They are finding amusement at her expense. And in an era defined by memes and instant online reactions, this isn't an easily manageable PR crisis. The profound impact didn't just come from the punchline itself. It lay in how perfectly it captured everything that observers had been quietly questioning for years. Meghan's public image had always relied on tight control. Every official statement, every public appearance, every project was filled with layers of meticulous refinement, from the perfectly composed family photos to the organic moments in interviews that somehow still felt like rehearsed monologues. Everything conveyed a sense of calculated strategy. However, the more you try to control public perception, the faster people start looking for flaws. And Stewart didn't just uncover these imperfections, he systematically exposed them with the blunt force of comedy. He specifically targeted confessions of a female founder, that hypothetical podcast. And honestly, that podcast, in its actual form as archetypes, hardly boosted her public standing. Marketed as a celebration of female entrepreneurship and empowerment, it was widely seen as resembling an overpriced TED Talk stuck in a Whole Foods aisle. Each episode seemed to follow a predictable pattern, a softly spoken introduction, lots of affirmations, and a strange reluctance to engage with real struggles. The show never truly delved into the harsh, unvarnished difficulties that real founders face. There was no mention of financial worries, no sleepless nights, no emotional breakdowns, no hard-won triumphs. Instead, the focus remained on vague stories of alignment and vision. Critics weren't being mean when they said it felt inauthentic. They were just being truthful. Meghan, despite her public image, had never actually started a company in the traditional sense. There were no first-hand experiences with payroll complexities, no hiring dilemmas, no product launches from scratch. The only true founding she had done was establishing a media brand inextricably linked to her royal title, and even that, by many accounts, wasn't performing well. Reports indicated that various deals were being cut, public engagement was dwindling, and even her Netflix animated project, Pearl, was quietly canceled before it could make any significant impact. Consequently, when Stewart lightly suggested that the show was less about founders and more about someone foundering, the impact was disproportionately severe. Not because it was brutal, but because it was undeniably accurate. He articulated precisely what everyone was already silently acknowledging, that Meghan's portrayal of struggle was so sanitized, it bordered on a caricature of genuine ambition. And when the joke landed, there wasn't a single gasp from the audience, only laughter. This perhaps represents the most powerful form of rejection. Not outrage, but profound indifference. Prince Harry, too, faced direct scrutiny. Stewart's jab at him, describing him as the unemployed immigrant who gave up his family, his home, and now carries his wife's handbag at charity dinners, wasn't just cutting, it was surgically precise. It directly undermined the carefully cultivated image of a royal rebel that Harry had tried to build since stepping away from the monarchy. His tell-all interviews, the high-profile memoir, Spare, the consistent emphasis on finding his voice. All of these efforts sharply contrasted with the picture Stewart offered, an individual constantly relegated to the sidelines of his own story. And realistically, this is increasingly the perception forming in public appearances. Harry rarely addresses the audience anymore. Meghan consistently takes center stage, giving the speeches and making the passionate appeals. Harry stands beside her, often smiling like a formal bodyguard. While this observation may seem harsh, public perception is everything, especially when your public image relies on being seen. If the public starts to view you as just an accessory in your partner's journey, public sympathy quickly disappears. The irony here is profound. Both Meghan and Harry built their post-royal brand on a foundation of authenticity. They claimed their departure from the palace was because it was stifling, preventing them from being genuinely themselves. However, outside those palace walls, their new life began to look equally, if not more, orchestrated. From the precisely timed paparazzi interactions to the seemingly private home footage in their Netflix documentary series, nothing any longer felt truly spontaneous. And when authenticity starts to feel conspicuously fake, it inevitably becomes material for comedy. Jon Stewart didn't originate the critical sentiment toward Meghan Markle. For many years, criticisms of the Sussexes mainly circulated within conservative media outlets, tabloid columns, or passionate online rants. However, this instance was a fundamental shift. This was a highly respected comedian, a figure known for his progressive ideals, openly articulating what a considerable number of people were already thinking, that perhaps the emperor was, in fact, without clothes. And the audience's response was applause. This signifies more than just a public relations challenge. It marks a significant cultural shift. This wasn't about her gender, her biracial identity, or her status as an outsider. That's often the defensive argument presented by her supporters. However, Stewart's joke wasn't targeting those characteristics. It was piercing through them, through the meticulous branding, through the rehearsed vulnerability, through the repetitive cycle of carefully presented victimhood. He wasn't mocking her identity. He was, rather, satirizing the way she seemingly used it as a shield. The laughter within that studio wasn't malicious. It was indicative of weariness. Weariness from being implicitly told to admire someone who always seemed just out of genuine reach. Weariness from being presented with empowerment that lacked real depth. Weariness from observing authenticity, marketed as a luxury product. The joke resonated not because people genuinely disliked Meghan, but because they no longer felt they truly understood who she was. And here lies the more complex truth. Jon Stewart is a comedian who chooses his targets with immense care. He doesn't chase fleeting popularity. He doesn't opportunistically jump on easy trends for viral content. If he chose to deliver that particular jab, it suggests he believed the public was ready to hear it. This is the unspoken truth, the quiet observation no one wants to say aloud, that perhaps, just perhaps, the prevailing sentiment has fundamentally changed. Not because people are consumed by animosity towards Meghan, but because they have simply stopped believing in what she's offering. Meghan's public image has always relied on controlling the narrative, to guide the story, sculpt the image, and dominate the conversation. From her big interview with Oprah to her polished documentaries, she carefully positioned herself as a voice of modern royalty, boldly assertive, effortlessly graceful, and tragically misunderstood by the old institutions that tried to silence her. However, when satire starts to dictate the discourse, the narrative slowly slips away from the person who once commanded it. This represents the true threat Meghan now faces, not widespread condemnation, but rather increasing irrelevance. The comparison to Brigitte Macron wasn't chosen randomly. It was selected for maximum impact. A woman widely seen as intelligent and elegant, yet often criticized for her perceived dominance in public, and a reserved demeanor behind the scenes. That label, Mini Brigitte Macron, was highly charged. It depicted Meghan as a figure who not only overshadows her husband, but actively shapes him into a secondary character in her own unfolding drama. In a different context, the joke might have been dismissed as just another celebrity jab. But coming from Jon Stewart, accompanied by the resounding sound of audience approval, it instantly became a major talking point. Meghan's reaction, described by insiders as furious and humiliated, is precisely what made the comedic bit so effective. The moment a public figure starts to take themselves too seriously, comedy inevitably finds its mark. And Meghan, despite her considerable poise and planning, perhaps overlooked the fact that sometimes the most effective way to protect one's public image is to let the humor land and simply move on. Instead, she is perceived as becoming increasingly agitated, frantically trying to salvage a reputation that is no longer entirely within her control. Her team has, predictably, tried to adjust their strategy. Reports circulate of new initiatives, fresh collaborations, even whispers of a media comeback. However, the prevailing sentiment has shifted. No matter how meticulously crafted the rollout, the public now interprets every action she takes through the lens of performance. A new podcast? Fabricated? A new charitable endeavor? A public relations maneuver? A seemingly spontaneous moment with her children? Staged. That is the fundamental issue. When your authenticity is met with laughter on a public stage, you no longer get the benefit of the doubt. And Harry? His public standing has diminished even more rapidly. Once the prince who famously stepped away from the crown to protect his wife, he is now frequently portrayed as a somewhat lost figure trailing behind her, seemingly unable to find his own voice or direction. His memoir, Spare, was meant to reclaim his personal narrative. Instead, for many, it was seen as a mix of a therapy session and an excessive tabloid exposé, creating more skepticism than empathy. Stewart's jest about the handbag in the exile wasn't just amusing. It was devastating due to its vivid imagery. Everyone could easily visualize it, and once a joke creates a persistent mental image, it becomes incredibly difficult to erase. There is a unique power in comedy that articulates truth with too much precision. It doesn't invite debate, it compels repetition. On social media, clips from The Daily Show continue to circulate widely. People aren't arguing about them. They are adding captions, integrating reactions, and creating TikTok videos that amplify the derision even further. Meghan and Harry are no longer just being criticized by detractors. They are being transformed into memes by former admirers. This particular form of backlash isn't loud or boisterous. It's characterized by its coldness. You won't see angry headlines or widespread boycotts. Instead, what you witness is silence, dwindling viewership figures, and an uninterested public. The very foundation upon which Meghan built her brand, attention, is now slipping away. And that outcome is more damaging than outright hostility. Hostility keeps your name in the news. Indifference, however, pushes you out of it entirely. Hollywood has noticed. Media executives who once eagerly pursued lucrative contracts are now quietly backing away. Podcast agreements are reportedly ending prematurely. Public interest is waning, not because Meghan committed an unforgivable act, but because she stopped being truly engaging. When every utterance sounds rehearsed, every smile appears timed, and every project feels like a public relations maneuver, the audience doesn't become enraged, they become bored. There was a time when Meghan symbolized something bigger than herself. She was a biracial woman who dared to challenge an institution centuries old. She went from an American actress to a duchess, then to an activist. She was envisioned as the embodiment of a new kind of monarchy, one that championed progress and transformation. But now, stripped of that mystique and supported by content that many find underwhelming, she is merely another celebrity trying to maintain relevance in a media landscape that moves too rapidly to genuinely care. Jon Stewart didn't directly dismantle Meghan Markle's public standing. He didn't need to. He simply lit the fuse. The real explosion came from the existing cultural atmosphere around her, a powerful combination of public weariness, unmet expectations, and years of meticulously crafted public performances finally cracking under scrutiny. The laughter wasn't solely about the joke itself. It was about the profound sense of release, the collective sigh from an audience that was finally done with pretending they couldn't see the underlying manipulations. And now, Meghan faces perhaps the most formidable challenge in the media sphere: re-engaging public interest, not eliciting sympathy, not provoking outrage, but simply capturing genuine attention. The difficulty lies in the fact that she cannot use the same old strategies. The victim card, for many, has lost its power. The feminist branding feels superficial. The fairy tale narrative has faded. If she truly wants to regain credibility, she will need to break everything down. Abandon the elaborate branding. Display genuine struggle, authentic success, something truly unscripted. However, such a fundamental shift is incredibly difficult for someone who has spent years perfecting a meticulously controlled narrative. And in a world where satire moves faster than sincerity, she may not be afforded the necessary time to even try. Because when Jon Stewart makes you the focal point of a joke, it goes beyond mere humor. It becomes a cultural judgment.